Okay, well, thanks for everyone for joining. I wanted to put together a case study, and this is something I've presented and talked about in some smaller groups, and some folks had asked me to put it together on video and share it here. So that's what I'm doing. And really, what this is about, as the title says, it's really how we made a Facebook video work by knowing what to look for and where. And kind of, there are a couple other ways to look at this. Certainly one of them is that the core of this was that I pulled some things from my background and history with managing infomercials in the direct response space. And it turns out that Facebook video and infomercials, at least in this particular case, had a lot more in common than I think we might have thought, and really wanted to share that experience. I think it's also an example of how to use information and really how to know what to look for, how to piece some things together. It's really not that complex, and you'll see that. But I really wanted to just see if I can share that and hopefully give some people some value here. So really kind of, let me jump in and let me give you just a little bit of background on me. There's a picture of my wife and I and our two sons. I usually like to start with this mostly, and as I tell people, is I get pretty intense pretty quick. And so this kind of keeps things grounded for me. Not to mention, for me, it's all about what's your why. And really this is my why, which is my family. Really is the most important thing, and why I do what I do. Professionally, just as background, for those of you who don't know, and I'll be brief about my background, but I just want to provide some context on where I'm coming from. I used to oversee media and customer acquisition at Beachbody. I was there for 8 years. I joined in '07 when we were about 100 million, and I left over 18 months ago by now, when we just passed $1 billion. During my time there, we managed over 500 million in media and acquired about 10 million customers through the direct response side of the business. So obviously saw a good amount of scale and growth, which was obviously a pretty awesome experience. By way of background, I got my bachelor's in math from MIT and got my MBA from Stanford. You'll see I'm kind of going through some metrics here, but I say this more as just a little bit of just knowing where I come from, but the reporting and the metrics and all those things we're looking at really has nothing to do in some ways with this background. And I kind of, it's a little bit of contrast that, I was pretty hardcore analytics growing up and through my career, but some of the stuff is really just getting some of the basics and fundamentals set up. And then finally, as I mentioned, I live here in LA with my wife and 2 kids. And here's a more normal picture of me. So sans that mustache. So let's just jump in. Let me cut to the chase first, and then we'll kind of work our way backwards just to get a sense of how we got success. So I work with one of my clients, Joyous. They're an online retailer marketplace, and really I describe them as a little bit of a QVC online. I go into a little more context about who they are in a bit, but we basically found success with a video ad that we scaled to 20 million views. You can see the metrics here, a ton of engagements. And more importantly, we basically scaled from 100 a day of media on Facebook to 12K a day in the matter of 3 weeks. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of kind of how we did that and certain parts about what we did and what we didn't do here. Here's the important thing, which was, I think, really startling, which was we ended up running about 80% of our media on Facebook, and over half of the revenues came through a non-Facebook link, which was pretty astounding. That had we just been looking at Facebook, we would have thought this campaign would have essentially been a loser. When it turns out that because we looked in a more holistic way and looked at the whole campaign, it actually turns out to be a winner and something we would have scaled versus something we probably would have put a bullet in pretty early. So what this really is about, and what this case study is really about, is understanding how to look at things in a sometimes more holistic view. And really knowing some basics and fundamentals about what to look for and certain places to be when it comes from a media and from just a business and marketing presence side. What it's not about is video production or creative. I'm not a production guy. I was at Beachbody for 8 years, as I mentioned, but I know some of the basics about production, but this is not going to be about tactics about production or about creative or copy, frankly. This is really a little bit more strategic and analytical, without certainly getting mired in the details, but it's about really, I come back to, you're going to hear me say a lot about basics and fundamentals, because I think the blocking and tackling is really the core of the business, and try not to get too distracted with shiny bright objects, because that can suck up a lot of time that's really not that productive. And really, ultimately, it's how to win, whether it's big or bigger, and that's relative for wherever people are. I think a big part of it is when you have a spark, how do you maximize the heck out of it, and how do you go deep? And then at the same time, as much as you want to win big, singles and doubles are okay. And at Beachbody, the campaigns that people probably didn't know nearly as much about still added up over time, and a lot of littles adds up. And certainly, it's a matter of how much effort and time you have to spend, but getting some small wins and decent wins is something I still continue to focus on and want my clients to continue to focus on. So first, let me take a brief aside and talk a little about infomercials. I want to provide a little bit of background on where I come from, and then kind of bridge this to how it affected Joyus and this specific Facebook video campaign. So historically, infomercials, I think as most people probably know, ran a lot on TV, and obviously, but in particular, the 800 number was the call to action, the CTA, right? And so, when you in the CTAs and the shows, it basically tell people to drive to a phone number, and certainly through the 80s and 90s, and this is going back a bit, that was the main CTA. Obviously, with the advent of the internet, the drive to online and those kinds of that kind of CTA became part of it. But for a while, it was considered gravy. And so I think up until a few years ago, still got asked whether we would count phone orders as well as web, or it was just phone. And, most of the DRTV, direct response television campaigns are seeing, more than 50%, if not, 2/3 to 80% of their orders come through online, assuming they have phone and web. And obviously, if it's 100% drive to web, then, that's what it is. So, we would look at phone orders as well as online, and certainly that's where we are today, where a disproportionate number of the orders are coming online, even though the media is still TV and is offline. It's driving people to online. So just a quick aside on this, which is, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I always ask people if they have a website, which is pretty much, I'm assuming, most people out there, and that's where you're driving most, if not all, of your traffic. Do you have a phone number on your website, and in particular to allow people to order? This is probably one of the highest leverage places, I think, that a lot of digital marketers, internet marketers, or folks who are just straight e-com, however you want to put it, they miss out on. And this could add anywhere from 5 to 15+% additional volume and additional transactions just by putting a phone number and allowing people to order. And certainly, as if you have an older demographic, and I'm going to say older is in 40 plus. I'm 43, so I'm not trying to be rude at all, but the reality is that folks who are 40 plus are probably more likely to call than certainly millennials. But again, the cost of trying this out and testing it out is not that hard. And I'm going to show just a brief way and a simple way to test out phone orders. What I suggest people do is just put an 800 number on your landing page as well as your checkout page. So on both. Unless you're a local business, don't put a local number. That 800 number makes a difference. Specify a set number of hours. So just tell people 9 to 5 is when you're going to answer your calls, and then forward that number to a prepaid mobile number. And so have someone on your team answer. And then over the next, let's say test this out for a couple of weeks, see what kind of volume you get. And then you can consider whether you want to set up a call center and be more advanced and more sophisticated. But some of it is literally what happens if you put a phone number on your site. I will say that there are some rules around PCI compliance, so please check those out. This is not a suggestion to do things that are against the rules, obviously. So just pay attention. But when we talk about infomercials, I think everyone thinks old school and associates the phone channel with it. But I also think that it's worth just a couple minutes here to have talked about it, because I think a lot of people who have sites are just missing out on incremental volume. And I think, frankly, this is a relatively easy way to test out, does a phone number on your site actually drive transactions? So when we would look at a campaign, this is one way we used to look at thinking about where transactions were coming from. And so what we would end up doing for a given campaign was look at the orders that came through different channels. So telemarketing, outbound telemarketing, web telemarketing. We actually had a different phone number on our website than we do it in infomercials, and then customer service. And so we would look to see how many orders came through each channel proportionally. So we would chart out by week how many orders and what kind of revenues do we get through each of these channels, and then look at what the proportion was and how that trended over time and come up with an assumption. So had we just looked at telemarketing, and the phone channel, we would have basically been missing out on what this adds up to as an incremental, basically 2+ orders. And so that's my point, which is people are coming through different channels to transact. We'd also obviously look at the value of an order per channel. And obviously these are made up numbers, but in general, people who come through the phone channel are worth more. They certainly also convert at a higher level than those coming through web. Web TM is generally a little bit more qualified. They've gone to the website, but then they call. So it kind of sometimes fits in the middle. And then we'd eventually, and I kind of just hit it here because it's not really meaningful, but figure out what the margin per order is for each of these channels. And so it was important to understand where were people coming, how were people transacting when we actually, let's say, aired in an infomercial. And so this is a little bit of the distinction between the value of a customer versus the value and impact of media. The value of a customer is for any given customer, what are they worth? But from the value of media is what is the value of that media and where are they driving? And so if I know that someone coming through telemarketing is worth whatever $100 per order on the front end and maybe $125 lifetime, and there's a margin of whatever that margin is, that's one thing. But I also want to know that if I'm driving TV media, what is the total value of that media and how much am I actually generating? I'm going to bring this back to Facebook video in a second, but that concept of there's a distinction between the value of a customer through a channel, but then the value of the media as well. I will say something about the reality of tracking and whether you're in the offline world or online world. It is getting harder and worse. It seems like it should be getting better. Excuse me. But it's 2016, and frankly, I think it is getting worse. The reality of multi-touch, and I hate the terms omni-channel, multi-channel, but people are going and touching and experiencing your brand in many different places. And so whether it's Facebook or offline or Google search or social media, there are just so many more touch points, and so it's getting messier. I actually think it's unfortunate and ironic, but that's the world we live in. And as painful as it is to say, and this comes from a DR guy and certainly a guy who started out much more quantitative, looking at things on an overall basis is sometimes a better way to do it. And my comment is, would you like to have more granularity but run less, or have a little bit less visibility and granularity but run more and obviously make more? And so I would say, a couple of years ago, I would never have thought that way. And it's not about don't look at anything and just look at everything overall, but it's about sometimes you got to see the forest through the trees. One note on attribution and how you give credit to different touch points. There's no doubt it's the bane of everyone's existence. There are plenty of technologies that are trying to solve for this. I would say that none of them are doing a great job. You're never going to be at 100%. The question is, how much marginal benefit can you get? There's also some, fingerprinting for device matching. And so that gets a little bit of times, feels almost like Big Brother, but knowing that a certain device, that my phone is the same for me as my PC at home. There are some things there, but you can spend a lot of time and money on this. I will say that you can still end up running some pretty solid campaigns without being so deep and spending, we spent 6 figures plus on this kind of thing. And I would argue that how much benefit we really got. It was also, frankly, some of the more complex campaigns out there in touch points. But you can talk and get deep about attribution, but at the end of the day, there are sometimes, you got to kind of not get so mired in the details and end up in this analysis paralysis world. So what does TV have to do with Facebook video ads? And certainly I think this is, I think everyone is probably committed now to video in some form, or hopefully is going to realize they're going to have to be. And so it's, how do we take what's happened over the past, however many years on TV and apply it to video ads, and really, what does this have to do with this campaign? So let's come back to Joyous now. And so as I mentioned, we found success with this video ad. I talked about where the revenues were coming from. And really what we found out, again, is TV is more applicable to digital than I think most people would have thought. So in the infomercial world, it took people a while to get to the point of saying, okay, yeah, we're going to have a website and we're going to actually count online orders. I would argue that each of these additional channels in digital are at varying levels by marketer of where people have actually brought them on. There are still folks who are not doing retargeting, certainly site retargeting and landing page retargeting, cart abandoned emails. I'm going to talk about Google and some of these things. Bing is, I would say, arguably completely overlooked. And while it's not a massive number, as I said, a lot of littles can add up. And certainly these last two affiliates in Amazon. I'm happy to hear that people are adopting these more, but I would say that just like the DRTV and the infomercial world was slow to adopt online and websites and all that, I think still in digital there are a lot of people who are still not adopting each of these. And frankly, setting these things up is not a massive amount of work. It's just about getting it done. I hear a bunch of reasons, whether you want to call them reasons or excuses, whether it's too much work, they don't know how. Hopefully you're not banned, and you actually are allowed to do this, but still hear people talking about that. I'm going to talk about a little bit about why it's not too many keywords. Amazon in particular is a small bit of cannibalization, but ultimately is a net win, especially, really for physical products. And again, I talked a little about being kind of a little bit ignored here. So what did we do with Joyous? We ran Facebook video ads, and then really we were in these other channels. And that's the crux of it. And getting Google and Bing and affiliates and these things set up was not weeks of work. It is literally single days worth of work. And though I'll talk about what happened with Amazon, which there was a slight problem when it came to what we did, but ultimately it's a net benefit, and I've seen it work in pretty much every single person I've worked with. So Joyous, as I mentioned, video commerce discovery platform. It's got a shoppable player. Basically, imagine QVC online. It's not live, but essentially it's video content and shoppable videos. You can see the site at joyous.com if you want to go see it. I'm not going to actually show the actual video. It's really not as relevant here, but I wanted to show the metrics. These are the real ones. You can probably find it if you look for it, but the actual video is less important than really the strategy behind it. And I don't want to get so caught up in tactics of what the video was. I frankly don't think it was an amazing video, but at the end of the day, it worked, and so that makes it amazing, and that makes it relevant. But, we got basically 20 million people reached. This is actually probably a little bit dated. We actually got to 21 million video views. So again, still massively significant from this side. So just to show a little bit of the performance metrics and the campaign we ran. So we ran 120K on media, and this is the first, I'd say tranche of the media that we ran. The rest of the other media was about 20K. And so you can see actually it was 86% of the media we ran was on Facebook, whereas 42% of the revenues came from Facebook. So you can see, just doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that math, that, we basically got almost 300K of revenues from 120K of media here, almost 400K of revenues from all the other channels, and about 20K of media that ran. You can see it from the count of orders, the CPAs, and then just from a sense of from the views. And for those of you who kind of are deep in some of these metrics, you'll have an appreciation for the volume of views and the cost per views here were unbelievably low. I will say that the conversion rate on the site was not great, but when you have traffic that is driving at this cheap amount, then it's relative. It's a lot easier to make those metrics back out. And so that's from the metric side. And I'm going to go a little bit further. You can kind of see it here in a graph that when we first started running media, these sales from other channels, they weren't big numbers. So there certainly was a little bit of traffic and revenue coming for this product on non-Facebook channels. But you can see that this line right here was Facebook video media that we ran, and the blue bar were sales from Facebook. And so you can see absolutely there was that initial non-Facebook transactional volume, but you can just see it visually that the orange graph starts to grow certainly disproportionately to the media that was running from these other channels. And we had it as a table, but again, if you spread the numbers and you put it on a graph, you can start to relatively easily see how what kind of performance is happening. And so had we just been looking at these Facebook video metrics, we would have had a certain, let me go back, we would have had a $59 CPA when we really, our target for this product was about $35, $40. And so had we looked at just Facebook alone, we would have been looking at a, certainly 50+% over goal. Now, it's also incorrect to look at the other channels and say, well, we're clearly getting a lift, we're getting great performance, and this channel, these other channels in Google and Bing and affiliates is getting a disproportionately high number of orders and having it non-explained. I will say that we did our research. There was nothing else out there, nothing else that was driving this kind of the demand on Google and so on. And so we got comfortable with that idea. And so it's certainly not to be forgotten that there might have been PR, there might have been something else out there. But the reality was that we got comfortable enough that it was absolutely the Facebook video ads that were driving the demand on non-Facebook channels. To give you a sense, over the course of these several weeks of how we got to that spend, we basically started out at $100 a day. Within a week we were at 2+ a day, got up to almost 4K, and then started popping. I have a philosophy on scaling media that is relatively aggressive, but it's also based in data and based in results. So we didn't just blindly increase. We knew that at each phase that we were successful, and so, but at the same time we pushed. And so I'll talk a little bit about my scaling media philosophy just as an aside, because I've talked to some people about this graph, and they were surprised at just how quickly we increased media based on the results we had. So, I will say once I was asked at Beachbody by the CEO when I first got in my in overseeing media in that role. 1 week I was asked why we didn't run more media, and I basically committed to never having that ever be a question that got asked as long as the results were there. So, I personally come from a fairly aggressive philosophy and mindset and approach, but it's also, I'm not blind to results. So it's aggressive, but the performance has to be there. And so that means you got to know your numbers. You certainly have to have the cash. So again, I'm not oblivious or delusional that sometimes you don't have the cash flow to actually fund additional media. But when you do, I'm a big believer of assuming the numbers hold out and you have the cash, then certainly to go as aggressive as possible. TV versus digital, I've kind of talked a little about that. I will say that in general on digital, you obviously have a lot more ability to turn off media, basically real time. If you don't want your Facebook campaign to run, from this point on, you go into the campaign, you turn it off, versus on TV, we were exposed for a good couple weeks. And, we could back out a little bit, but certainly wasn't real time like you have in digital, and where for all intents and purposes, you can turn it off very, very quickly. And so when you have that kind of ability, I think it actually argues for being even more aggressive until you find out something's not working. I would say the other side of that, by the way, though, is some folks are so hyper analytical and hour to hour, day to day, that they don't let a campaign sometimes run and mature. So I think there's always that those tensions to be balancing. And then one final thing, which is we've seen it on TV, and certainly I've seen it now on digital, that sometimes when you double spend, I think the natural inclination is that your CPAs are going to go up, when in fact I've seen them go down over time. And so sometimes there are just some weird results that happen. And so you got to measure and track everything. But I will say that it's not always the case that when you increase your spend that your CPAs are going to get worse. And so again, it's about you monitor and you track and you make sure you're keeping the attention to the right metrics. So let's look at this exact campaign and what happened. If we had just looked, and this is really just a few weeks, but I think it'll prove a point, which is if we had just looked at Facebook alone, the blue bar is revenue, the orange bar is media, and then this red line is the ROAS, return on ad spend. So essentially, revenues divided by media. This green dotted line was where we needed to be. And so week 1 we were doing well. We had spent $50K in total. The second week we were basically at goal. It's gotten up to 70+K, and then week 3 we were almost at 90K of spend, and so certainly starting to look well below our target. Now, if we look at non-Facebook, This is a different scale because of just how high the ROAS was here. But this was our goal, and you can see that in fact the ROAS was getting better, whereas on Facebook it was actually getting worse. Which, whether that's intuitive or not, doesn't matter. It was just the results were what they were, and so clearly, and again, as I said, we did enough research and scouring to know that there was nothing else that was driving this kind of demand. And so when you look at the all-in results, we're still above goal at this week 3 versus if we were looking at Facebook only, we would have probably shut down this campaign or optimized or cut spend, and that wasn't what we needed to do here. So when you look at the all-in results, and because we looked at it on a much more holistic basis, we were actually able to see that this campaign was working overall, and so that was obviously that let us feel good about the results and continue to spend. One report that should help you find this, or really what report helps you see this. One of the things I've started to put in place with a bunch of my clients now is for a given campaign, looking at weekly results and looking at revenues in media by week, by channel. So whatever your attribution methodology is, how much did you generate from Facebook, Google, Bing, Amazon, and so on? What was the media and what was the ROAS? And again, I'm a big believer, as much as I'm started out as a numbers guy, that looking things on graphs, I think, can certainly help you see things in a lot better way. One point about this campaign, the reason I didn't show it all the full thing, but in one of the graphs you might have seen the media spend drop down over time was simply because we had actually run out of inventory. We had actually checked, and it turned out that we thought we had enough, and we basically sold out. It took another 60 days or so to get the campaign back up and running. When we got it back up, it had basically performed the exact same way, and so we actually were able to keep it back up and going. So the media spend that you saw drop a few slides back was really because of inventory, and that was the only reason. One other comment I'll make about Amazon: we actually did not own the product on Amazon, and the third party that had access to it there was about to send it back to the manufacturer when all of a sudden their demand spiked dramatically, and in a few weeks they were sold out as well. They had absolutely no clue what was driving that demand, and so had we owned that product on Amazon, the results would have been even better. And again, for anyone who is questioning about the importance or the relevance of Amazon, I kind of hope that you're over that and you've gotten there. I would say probably other than beauty and maybe some real edge case categories, if you have a physical product, Amazon has got to be a crucial part of your strategy. So really, to sum up, a few last slides to kind of bring this home, which is the second key to success really after having a decent video is you got to be in the important places. So what did we do on Google? So search, first of all, really what we were doing was, I would say, probably 20 to 30 keywords. It was trademark plus, misspellings. So trademark plus and brand really terms. And so it's really what are the core USPs, names, whatever it is that are mentioned in the video. That was really all we put. We were not doing anything edge case. We were not doing long tail. It was literally 30 keywords that we had in place. And I think certainly the misspellings are a key thing. People are not going to get it right. And so make sure you're capturing that. So it wasn't a highly sophisticated search campaign. It was literally the basics. GDN, we had retargeting in place through GDN and through the Google Display Network. So that certainly picked up a bit. And then Google Shopping. And again, I think this is one of these afterthought strategies that people have. But let me show you this. So I did a search on Google on my mobile device, which is frankly how most people are doing it, especially if they're getting a Facebook video ad. The Google Shopping results are actually the first thing that is coming up, and then Amazon is coming up second, and then typically at least, and then the organic search results are coming. So Google Shopping is actually becoming, for certain products, an increasingly important strategy here. And then, so Bing. So let me actually just jump to, and then affiliates and Amazon to kind of talk about these. So when you talk about Bing, I typically see it as 5 to 10% of incremental revenue. And so that's 5 to 10%. But my question to people is, well, if you don't want that 5 to 10%, can I have it? and I'm being somewhat rhetorical and silly in that, but it drives home the point that you don't want to give it away to some random person, and so why not take it yourself? And it's the time and effort to set up Bing and get the pixel set up and the campaign set up is literally a few hours of work. You can find someone. I assume if you're running Facebook video ads, though they or someone else can run Bing for you relatively easily, and all those little bits of 5-10% will start to add up over time. You get a few of those, and that's a lot. But frankly, I'll take that 5-10% for a few hours of work any day. And so, especially with older demos, Bing becomes an increasingly important part of the strategy. I kind of jumped over this, but affiliates. So we were set up with folks like Retail Me Not and Ebates. Again, that added another 10-15% on top of everything else we were getting. Again, getting set up with the affiliates is not a massive amount of work. It's hard to get attention from them, but people are going to search for your product with promo code, with some kind of thing, and so they're going to. Some of that may be demand that might have gone to Google and Bing, but honestly, the net benefit usually is positive. So getting set up with affiliates is yet another way to do it. And again, this is a little bit different than your JV partners probably that some folks are running with, which we're doing email launches and blasts, and certainly that can be part of it. But again, just getting set up with some of these bigger affiliate partners is an important part of the strategy. And then Amazon, it's no longer just gravy. Yes, it absolutely cannibalizes, but I think that's about 2% versus there are just some folks, and I'm included in this, they're just Amazon buyers. If I find something online, my first thing I'm going to do is go to Amazon, see if it's available there. My credit card info's there. I know the shipping process. I know the return process. Everything is just a lot easier. At the very least, too, you can use it as a way to test pricing. Or if you want to do an exit intent pop and drive into Amazon and show it actually at a higher price. So you can absolutely, especially if you do FBA, you can and you're set up in Amazon as a 3PL partner, you can absolutely change your pricing the way you want it to. And so you can say, hey, it's available on Amazon, but it's at a higher price, and so that might be a strategy to drive people back. You've got to own the buy box, and at the very least, again, too, with Amazon, it's a review site, and it's kind of, there's almost this social component of people engaging and reading the comments and that conversation. It's certainly not like Facebook in that way, but as a review site and part of the community, it is particularly important, and people are going to be reviewing it and going there looking for feedback. There are some things with digital that you can do on Amazon, certainly not as much as physical, but if you have a digital product, it's certainly worth exploring and seeing what kinds of things can help you there. And really, so now to wrap up, what are the key lessons here? So first of all, obviously, it always starts with the creative and the offer. If you don't have that, it's very hard to make the rest of it work. You got to be more than one place to pick up the overflow. And so Facebook video ads, just like TV, drive overflow. And as much as we would on TV drive people to the phone, and certainly online, even sometimes we actually didn't even have a URL, people would go do it. They're doing that same thing here. If your brand is not as well known, people are going to want to do more research. So the offer and the creative may be intriguing enough to capture people's attention, but they may not be ready to order yet. And so they may go look on your Facebook page, go look on Amazon, go do some search, go look for a promo code. And it's really about being in all those places, which again, it's not a massive amount of work to get set up to get those things to work. Know how to count the appropriate pieces. So, I showed that chart earlier in the presentation. And so some of it's just literally line up by week. What are your revenues? What are your spend? What are your order counts? And that can help certainly just to start piecing things together. Certainly, obviously, owning the product can help. And so if you're that really in particular helps with Amazon. I've talked a little about being in Amazon, obviously, and then I'd say lean into success. So when you have it, and when you know your numbers, and if you have the cash and you can afford to do it, push hard because someone else may come in there, and frankly, you got to go get it when you can. Last thing I would say is what I wish for. Had we been able to run this campaign longer and better than I would have hoped, certainly more inventory. I would have loved to have been on Amazon. We did not even touch YouTube and YouTube ads, frankly, even from a retargeting side. So we didn't even get to go after there. We did very minimal landing page testing. Again, that's got to be a core part of any strategy. Our upsells were relatively weak, and so certainly if we had more upsells, and I think I've talked previously about I think at least a minimum of 2 upsells, and we've run 7, 8 upsells, and you got to test into that. But as long as it's incremental, and you got to think about your brand impact, but there's a way to do it in a way that's relevant and appropriate, and doesn't and that actually your customers actually appreciate it, and it's relevant for them as opposed to just yet another offer. And then certainly a phone number. We actually did not have a phone number for this campaign. As much as I talk about what we wanted to do, some things you actually, and I get it, sometimes you don't have the time or the resources to get those in place, but had we had more time earlier in the year, we would have certainly gotten that up, and I know that would have certainly helped response and our results. So that's it. I know that was a bit of a mouthful, but hopefully that was helpful. Certainly if you have any questions, here's my site. You can certainly feel free to reach out to me if there's anything I can do for you, but hopefully you found this helpful, and I'll be hopefully looking to doing more of these over time. So thanks a lot. Take care.